Think about the longest you've ever been truly alone. Not lonely, actually alone. No messages arriving, no sound of another person anywhere, no voice, no footstep, no notification. For most people, the answer is hours, maybe a day. Now try to imagine multiplying that by 438, 14 months, across 9,000 miles of open ocean with no land, no contact, no other human being. What would happen to you? Not physically. We know what happens physically. Hunger, thirst, sun, salt. What would happen to your mind? More specifically, what would happen to the part of your mind that knows who you are? Because the research on extreme isolation has found something most people don't expect. The thing that kills you in isolation isn't the thirst, it's the silence. And the silence has a mechanism. November 17th, 2012. San Blas, Mexico. Before dawn, the Stickman is a fisherman. His name in the real story is Salvador Alvarenga. He and his crewmate Ezekiel leave the dock on a routine trip, targeting yellowfin tuna 60 to 100 miles offshore. They have done this dozens of times. The weather changes. A storm hits after dark, fast, severe, beyond the forecast. The boat fills with water. The engine floods. The engine dies. They have no working radio. The emergency beacon is missing. The current takes them west into the Pacific, away from Mexico, away from everything. They try to signal passing vessels for the first weeks. Vessels pass, none stop. After 11 days, the Mexican Coast Guard calls off the search. They are declared lost at sea. The Stickman does not know this yet. He is still bailing water from the boat, still believing the current will bring him back. The current does not bring anyone back. Ezekiel stops eating on approximately day 25. He had been drinking seawater, against Alvarenga's instructions, against everything survival knowledge says. His kidneys are failing, his body shutting down. Alvarenga begs him to eat, threatens him, holds food to his mouth, weeps. On approximately day 28, Ezekiel Cordoba dies. Alvarenga sits in the boat with his crewmate's body for a period of time he will later describe as impossible to measure. Then he does the only thing available to him. He releases the body into the ocean. He watches it drift away. And then there is only the boat, and only the Stickman, and 9,000 miles of water with no edges. What happens next is not a physical story. What happens next is what the research has spent 40 years trying to understand: what extended total isolation does to the human mind, and specifically to the human self. The self is not a fixed thing. It is a construction, built moment to moment from the reactions of other people. When someone laughs at what you say, your brain updates its model of who you are. When someone ignores you, your brain updates its model of who you are. When someone calls you by your name, your brain receives a signal: I exist, I am located, I am this. Remove all of that, every social signal, every reflection, every confirmation that you exist inside someone else's awareness, and the self begins to dissolve. Not immediately, gradually, over months. Psychiatrist Stuart Gratian documented this in prisoners held in solitary confinement, some for far shorter periods than 438 days. The pattern was consistent. First, the sense of time distorts. Then, the ability to distinguish memory from imagination. Then, the boundary between self and environment. The prisoners who lost their minds in isolation were not weak or mentally fragile. They were human. The human self requires other humans to stay coherent. It was never designed to run alone. Alvarenga began talking to Ezekiel, whose ghost he perceived as present, as a companion in the boat, to the birds that landed on the hull. He named them. He told them about his life. He asked them questions. He talked to God. And most importantly, he talked to his daughter, Fatima, a daughter he had left behind in El Salvador before the fishing trip. He could not see her, could not hear her voice, had no photograph. He held her name. He described conversations with her, imaginary conversations conducted over months of open ocean, in which he told her about his day, what he had caught, how the weather was, what he was thinking about. Researchers call this social hallucination, and the clinical consensus is that it is not a symptom of breakdown. It is a survival feature. The brain, faced with complete social deprivation, does not simply stop needing social contact. It generates it. John Cacioppo, whose research on loneliness remains the most cited in the field, documented that mentally representing a specific person holding them clearly, conversing with them internally, activates the same neural pathways as physical social presence. The brain cannot tell the difference. Alvarenga was not hallucinating from madness. He was using the only social contact available to him, and the contact he returned to most, the one that held the most neural weight, was his daughter. Fatima was his identity tether, the named, specific, held connection that prevented his self from dissolving completely into the silence of the Pacific. January 30th, 2014. 438 days after the engine died, the boat drifts near Tile Islet in the Marshall Islands. A couple living on the island, Emmy and Russell Lakadrick, see a figure on a derelict vessel. They approach carefully. The figure does not move the way a person moves. His body is wasted. His hair and beard are long and matted. His skin is darkened beyond recognition. He speaks Spanish, a name, Salvador. He has not spoken to a human being in 409 days. He is flown to a hospital in Majuro. When they call his mother in El Salvador, she believes it is a joke because Salvador Alvarenga has been dead for over a year. He asks one question before anything else. He asks about Fatima. She is alive. She is well. He had been talking to her for 14 months. She had no idea. Here is what the research found. Isolation is not a single event. It is a three-phase psychological arc. Phase 1. Adjustment, days 1 through 28. The brain treats isolation as temporary. It runs the normalization response, the same mechanism we saw in the Andes. It tells itself rescue is coming, help is near, this will end soon. The adjustment phase is survivable because hope requires no evidence to function. Phase 2. Identity dissolution, months 2 through 10. The hardest phase, the one most people in documented isolation cases do not psychologically survive intact. The self begins to lose coherence without social reflection. Time distorts, memory blurs. The sense of existing as a distinct person, separate from the ocean, from the silence, from nothing, requires constant maintenance. The people who lose themselves entirely in this phase are not weak. They simply had no identity tether strong enough to hold the self together against the current. Phase 3, meaning reconstruction, month 10 through rescue. The phase that almost no research subject reaches. Alvarenga reached it. After the self is threatened but not lost, after the tether holds and the hallucinations serve, a strange kind of adaptation occurs. The isolated mind rebuilds its sense of self from what it has, not from what it needs. It becomes, in a clinical sense, self-sufficient, not happy, not undamaged, but coherent. Functioning, forward, 3 phases. The identity tether is what carries you through phase 2. And the social hallucination is not the sign that you're losing. It is the sign that your brain found a way to survive losing. You have been isolated. Not for 438 days. But you know what it feels like when the silence gets too long. When you go too many days without a conversation that actually reaches you. When the people around you are present but not seeing you. When the social contact exists, but the reflection doesn't. The isolation arc doesn't need a Pacific Ocean. It runs in apartments, in relationships that went quiet, in the gap between who you used to be and who you're trying to figure out how to become. And the research says the same thing in every setting. The self requires other people to stay coherent. Not many, not constant, but specific, named, held. Alvarenga held one name for 438 days. It was enough. The question the isolation arc asks is not, do you have people around you? The question is, do you have someone you're holding on to? Specifically, by name. Because the brain doesn't need the person to be present. It needs the person to be real. The Stickman drifted 9,000 miles. He came back because he had something to come back to. You don't need to drift 9,000 miles to need the same thing.